What's going on, guys? Noobs here. Well, ever since the announcement of the Super Nintendo Classic Edition or Mini or whatever you want to call it, I've been thinking a lot about what these Classic Edition consoles might mean for the future of Virtual Console, particularly on the Switch. The gears really started turning after a recent Nintendo investor Q&A, so they were asked this very bizarre question. Several Game Boy Advance titles have been released on Virtual Console for Nintendo 3DS already, but have you thought about making them available through retail? Now, first of all, who asks about GBA games on Virtual Console? Why are you wasting your investor question? They never asked the questions I want them to ask. Nevertheless, Nintendo gave a pretty interesting answer. We have been thinking about a lot of different ways to make use of Virtual Console titles, and not just Game Boy Advance titles. Similar to these software titles, we have made available on a variety of platforms over the internet. We consider the Nintendo Classic Mini Super Famicom to be a type of Virtual Console. They went on to say it would be possible to sell these titles as packaged software or via download cards. And then they went on about figuring out if that would be viable or not. So that really makes me wonder, like, game cards, is that something they're actually considering? Was that something they just threw out to wrap up the question? I'm not sure. First, let's answer the question, what's next for the Classic Edition consoles? The obvious thought would be next year it's got to be N64, right? Well, I think there are just too many issues with that. I don't think they're going to do it. Now, the most obvious thing is, what do you do with the rare titles? So much of the N64's library, so much of what people remember that console for are rarest games. The Banjo games, GoldenEye Perfect Dark, Blast Corps, so many other games, right? Now, I don't think it's impossible for Nintendo to get those on board. Nintendo and Microsoft have been willing to work together in the past. I mean, we had rare games showing up on GBA and DS. We had, even just recently, they've worked together on Minecraft stuff. I don't think it's out of the question. And you know what? I mean, even GoldenEye, as crazy as this may seem, I don't think it's totally impossible they could get GoldenEye. If you remember, Rare was... they had figured out all the rights to get GoldenEye released on XBLA, and then Nintendo said no at the last minute. So I think it's possible it could happen. Having said that, that's already a big enough issue. In addition to that, you got to consider the controllers. And I think this is the real killer here. It's not a two controller console, it's 4. That is a big element of that system. As well, those controllers are very big and bulky. They've got a lot more to them than an NES or a Super Nintendo controller. I think they would be much pricier for Nintendo to produce, and I just don't see them going back to selling standalone controllers alongside the system as well, because you're not going to bundle all 4 in with it. Certainly not. Maybe they'd be willing to, because it's the Mini, just sell it with 2 controller ports. As well, the N64 just did very poorly in Japan, and Nintendo always thinks Japan first. And, the whole N64 thing was very much a Western-focused device. That's where most of the nostalgia is as well, especially North America. Much less so in Japan, I think. So, I just don't think it's as viable a product. The nostalgia is a lot less, and there are just a lot more complications to it. I don't think they'll do it. What I do think they'll do, though, here's my prediction for next year's Classic Edition Game Boy. I think they'll do a complete Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance package all as one. They'll make it look like the classic Game Boy brick. Well, I'm not sure, actually. I guess the GBA had shoulder buttons, didn't it? But they'll figure it out, I think. Well, I should also mention, I think they will include Mother 3 in the Game Boy Classic Edition. That's where it'll finally come out in the West, and that'll be sort of the hardcore hook, similar to how Star Fox 2 is coming out on the Super Nintendo Classic. And I think that'll be it for brand new Classic Editions, but I do see the following year, I'm thinking they'll bring back the NES Classic, this time bundled with 2 controllers instead of just 1, maybe change up the library a little bit. Beyond that, I don't know, that might be it from them, but that's where I see this going. So as they said in that investor question, they consider these classic editions kind of part of the virtual console. It's another way for them to sell old content, right? Cash in on their nostalgia. I'm sure they see the Switch's online service download games, the classic game selection. That they're even calling it classic game selection, part of this virtual console stuff as well. I think they're kind of taking a more holistic view of this all, whereas us at home maybe just think virtual console. I mean, that for us fans of virtual console or chronic haters, people who have been disappointed by it for years like myself, see virtual console as its own thing that we want to see supported. Nintendo seems to have a broader view of this, which I think makes sense, but at the same time, like they're really not giving a lot of their biggest fans what they want either. One other lesson I hope they're taking from these classic editions, and something that I've noticed, is that, hey, if they actually put some effort into these things, they could do a lot better job, right? Like the emulation on the NES Classic just looked a lot nicer than that dim look of the NES games on Wii U Virtual Console. As well, they can get interesting games on there, Super FX chip games, even unreleased games like Star Fox 2. Like, there's so much more they can do when they're putting a little, investing a little more into this instead of just like cranking out the odd NES or Super Nintendo game from in what appears to have just been their spare time in head office. So here's my other prediction. I don't think we're going to see proper virtual console as we know and love/hate it on Switch. But here's what I think we'll get instead. Referencing back to this idea that they might sell these games on game cards, here's what I'm thinking. We're going to start getting the Classic Edition games as just compilation games on Switch. Just here's your Super Nintendo Classics, the 21 games on a card. But here's the extra hook. They're going to have DLC for this thing where they sell you more games. I know that sounds exactly like Virtual Console, but I think then they can tap into more of the kind of the collector, gotta catch them all mentality and kind of leave those blank spots and kind of convince you like, hey, you gotta buy all these extra games to fill it all up. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that they left gaps in the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. You gotta be able to find a way to get the other two Donkey Kong Country games, the other Final Fantasy game, all the other great Super Nintendo games that aren't on that thing. I think that's how they'll do it, how they'll be able to push more of these games than they ever did for Virtual Console on its own, and maybe bring more kind of hype and attention to their classic game library, because that was something they never did very well with Virtual Console. People who really paid attention knew what was out and what was coming. Everybody else didn't seem to have any clue, in large part because Nintendo didn't do anything to market it. Well, this is a much more marketable product, I think, they can kind of manipulate people's emotions a little more this way. So there we have it. That's where I see Virtual Console classic games on Nintendo systems going. Yeah, it's not a bright future. I would personally just prefer to buy these games one at a time, and really I'd like all my past purchases to carry forward. That's the dream. As well, I really just want these games portable. As excited as I am, assuming I can actually get it for the Super Nintendo Classic, I want these on my Switch. I want to play it on a portable. These games are just so much nicer on a handheld. Older games just fit handheld so nicely. So I hope, beyond hope, that they find a way to make that happen. I know the idea of us having to buy them all again in like a compilation would be a downgrade, but it's better than them doing nothing, which pretty much feels like what they've been doing lately. So there we go. Let me know what do you guys think? What do you see as the future of Virtual Console and the Classic Edition systems? Do you like my ideas? Do you hate my ideas? Let me know, and thanks for watching.